It is Tuesday, August 4th, 2026, coming to you from America's beautiful North Coast, from the shores of Lake Superior. This is the American Descent. I'm your host, Sam Martin.
And I'm Jen Schultz.
On today's show, we'll be playing an interview we recorded earlier today with an advocate for family farmers, a member of the Minnesota Farmers Union, and, of course, a farmer in her own right, Missy Bakker Roach. Stick around for that excellent conversation. In the news, the United States is now incredibly low on long-range missiles, and military leaders are saying that they no longer have the missile capability to achieve the goals that, frankly, they already weren't achieving in Iran, or have the ability to be effective elsewhere in the world. This, of course, further increases the leverage that Iranians have against the United States and its allies. Meanwhile, Israel has ramped up its attacks on Gazan civilians in the few days since Donald Trump announced a peace deal in Gaza, killing many more families and innocents. It is fair to say that Trump's inability to control Israel despite his announcement will also play a role in Iran's next moves. More horrors from ICE. Another death of someone held in ICE detention, this time again at the New Jersey facility called Delaney Hall. Edwin Lopez Cornejo, 41, and the father of a 12-year-old U.S. citizen, had received poor medical care while in custody. His cause of death has not been released. Meanwhile, the family of Daphne Michel, a 31-year-old Haitian immigrant woman who was left by ICE to freeze to death in Pittsburgh last February, is suing ICE. The local medical examiner recently ruled her death a homicide. She was known by authorities to have had mental health issues, and when she was released by ICE, it was at a bus stop 20 miles from her home, and only in the summer clothes she had been arrested in that summer. In politics, today is primary day in several states. Of course, we'll be watching Michigan's Senate race, and we've talked quite a bit about Michigan's 7th Congressional District with William Lawrence. Other important races to watch. Michigan's 13th District has tightened significantly as the comically villainous Democratic incumbent Sri Thanedar, a darling of the crypto industry, faces off against a gregarious challenger and DSA endorsee Donovan McKinney. Meanwhile, in Missouri, in the 1st Congressional District, Cori Bush looks to make a comeback to Congress after being unseated by AIPAC's preferred candidate, Wesley Bell, in what was, at the time, the most ever spent in a congressional primary. Since then, it has been eclipsed by AIPAC's spend in Kentucky to successfully defeat Thomas Massie in the GOP primary there. Of note, on the other side of the state, in a deeply red district south and southwest of Kansas City, another young DSA endorsee, Hartzell Gray, hopes to be the Democrat to take on incumbent Republican and heavy favorite Mark Alford. Alford has supported Trump's tariffs agenda, voted against releasing the Epstein files, and is known in his district for telling the laid-off federal employees that, quote, God has a plan and purpose for your life, unquote, while defending the Doge massacres to federal programs. These headlines and others on today's American Descent. So, Jen, I got over that old man thing I keep bringing up, and I actually did early vote today.
You did early vote. Was it busy? Was it busy?
I was the only one there. I went to City Hall.
Okay.
And just took care of it. I was out on errands, and I was really frustrated because it was like red tape type errands, and it wasn't going well, and I didn't have the right document, and oh God, it was so terrible.
You're trying to renew your driver's license?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Headache. Those are headaches, especially if you need a real ID.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, this is the right kind of document, but we need a different document. Do you have it? We could print it for you. I'm like, So I was on the phone and driving around. And so I'm like, you know what? I need a win today. So you know what I did? I went and I voted in the primary, and that was a win. That felt good.
Yeah. So you'll probably be up late tonight watching the results come in. But maybe it won't take too long. I don't know. I'm going to guess larger voter turnouts in the primary in certain states like Michigan. So it might take longer to find out.
I think if anything is going to take longer, it's going to be the stuff that's lower down on the ballot. Maybe Donovan McKinney's race. That one was kind of flying under the radar for a little bit, including with me. I apologize for that, but recently I've seen him do some excellent interviews. This guy is so like perfect for that district. I mean, it's one of the poorest districts in Michigan. It's in Detroit. It's, and he has an incredible, backstory himself. And then the incumbent, who's a carpetbagger guy, very wealthy, Sri Tanadar. This guy, I mean, comically villainous. I mean, literally a puppy killer. So he was invested in a company, was the primary investor in a company that was doing lab testing on animals. The company went under, so they just shuttered the building with a bunch of monkeys and dogs just locked inside, uncared for.
Wow.
I mean,
but I think a lot of the more progressive candidates, they're expected to do well because of the issue, the Gaza-Israel issue, and AIPAC. And so,
and data centers.
And what will this mean if we see a lot of these more progressive candidates come through the primary? What does it mean for the Democratic Party, Sam?
Well, there's a clip going around. I should have had it ready, Jen, but I mean, I suppose I could. But so if you want to kind of get a sense of where the old guard, and by old, I do mean old, James Carville was, one of the top strategists for Bill Clinton back in 1992 and through those years. And he's still a name. He still gets bandied about there, and he still gets interviewed all the time. Well, anyways, he was on Fox News. Keep in mind, the audience is the Fox News audience, telling them that in discussing the Abdul El Sayed race, he switches targets to Hassan Piker. I wonder what's similar about those two names. To say that if there's space in the party for them, he specifically said Hassan Piker, then I will leave the Democratic Party. And from my perspective, it's like, okay, ma'am, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But what it means is that the people who have made enormous amounts of money, and let me be very clear about James Carville, he has made enormous amounts of money as a consultant for Democrats. And his consultation, like when Trump got elected, do you know what his main advice was? And it was advice Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries followed. It was curl up in a ball and don't say anything and let the Republicans, hurt themselves. And by following that advice, honestly, that opened the door to Zoran Mamdani, Abdul El Sayed, and Jessica Hong in Wisconsin, and Peggy Flanagan here in Minnesota. I mean, that strategy opened the door because people were like, you've got to fight against this. And then I think beyond just fighting against Trump is the necessity to have a positive, here's what I'm going to do for you message that these people are relentless on and have been relentless on. Here's what I want to do.
In terms of the party, the old guard Democrats, I don't think they'll even consider changing their strategy until some of these progressives actually win the general election. They beat Republicans. Then I think the Democrats need to listen and re-strategize, prioritize, make sure that we're more inclusive. Not even Fetterman said he's going to leave the Democratic Party. So it's interesting that James Carville is saying that. I hopefully doesn't mean it, but
I hope he does. I hope he does mean it.
We need everybody we can get right at this point, Sam, to win.
Well,
I think he does more.
I think he does more harm than good, frankly. That famous saying of Lyndon Johnson was, "I'd rather have people inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in." Well, James Carville is inside the tent pissing in it, and that's the kind of stuff that these are the very same people who, when it was the harm reduction argument, I mean, this is what for years, I feel like my entire adult life, it's been harm reduction candidates. Vote for this person because the Republican is worse. Whereas I rarely, ever especially when I lived in California. People think of California as this, leftist, crazy, liberal. No. It's like I felt like every time I voted in California, it was harm reduction. I mean, Gavin Newsom is just awful. And like, I could go on, but
I really think the Democrats are going to win by coming together, even though not everyone agrees on every issue, because we want the Republicans, they're splintering, right? You got a lot of the Maha folks not happy with the Republicans' legislation on making America healthy again. And then you got Tucker Carlson up in Maine in his lodge in Maine. He's got Marjorie Taylor Greene there, Marjorie Taylor Greene's new husband, Tom Massey, a couple other folks that are upset with Trump. They're all trying to strategize about how they create a different party. They break off with Republicans and take all their supporters with them. So let the Republicans splinter apart.
I'm pretty skeptical about that. I think they're just lining up for a way to get behind someone like J.D. Vance, I think, or behind Tucker himself. I think
maybe behind Tucker. I'm not sure they're big. I don't know how big of fans they are.
I mean, there's more to that than it would seem on the surface. But the reason I'm hesitating here a little bit is because these people that are so upset on the Democratic side by this wave of the left. And by the way, these people are being picked by Democratic voters. These are primaries, and the Democratic voters are making the choice. As Zoran Mondani said, Jen loves when I keep quoting him, but as he said, what is a party if not its voters?
Right.
And that's the thing that James Carville and the like are trying to deny, is like the very fact that these are the people the voters are choosing. And, yes, they have to win in the general, but what does it say that they would rather like fight against this? Because they have power in the Democratic Party right now. They have all the power. And for a lot of them, I think they'd rather have power in a moribund minority party than they would relinquish power to give that party the majority. And I think that's really what this comes down to, is it's just a party. It's a power game. It's a money game, because the vast majority of these high-paid Democratic strategists are paid highly because they keep doing the same old, same old. They spend enormous amounts of money on television ads. Haley Stevens' campaign is, soup to nuts, the traditional, party.
I'm excited to see candidates who are not moneyed, don't have big money behind them, win. I don't want money to win. I really don't want money to win. I just want the people to vote for who they think is going to represent their values and do what's right by their community. That's what I want. I don't want AIPAC's money to decide elections. People are so sick of that. And that's probably some of the backlash, too, against some of these candidates and why they might not win. And then after this, I mean, we're going to have to add up all the money that was spent in these primaries that could have been spent in the general against the Republican opponents.
Oh, yeah.
That is what's
I saw today. Do you know what the number I saw just today, this morning, for the total for Haley Stevens in Michigan? $80.9 million. 80.
Think of what we could do with $89 million to get people.
Well, because
keep hospitals open. Jeez.
Right, when Abdul El Sayed had his position with his public health position, he was able to negotiate away huge amounts of medical debt, and every $10 million paid off $1 billion worth of medical debt. So he's going around saying, "Hey, she's spending $60 million. Now it's $80 million." But when the number was 60, he was saying $60 million spent on her campaign. That's $6 billion of medical debt that could just be wiped out. We could use that money for that. And it's just such an effective argument. Mm-hmm. And who's going to disagree with what you just said about getting money out of politics? I mean, honestly, who disagrees with that?
I went door knocking this weekend for the GFL party in Minnesota. It was hot. It was like 85 degrees. But talked to a lot of voters, and they are very excited about voting in the primary. I did not have to remind them that there was a primary in Minnesota going on. They all knew, and some of them voted already. And so
Minnesota's
I know,
special
but
that way.
they are they are not beaten down from everything that's going on. They are excited. They are hopeful. They are optimistic. And so that was a really rewarding for me to go hear the optimism from people, even though like a lot of crap is going on and has been going on under the Trump administration, that they feel change is coming. They feel an opportunity to flip the House and possibly the U.S. Senate. And when that happens, Democrats are going to send as many moderates as they do progressives. So I don't know if the balance of power is going to shift that much in the U.S. House and Senate, but I think their priorities are going to be different.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't take, I mean, if you remember the Tea Party wave, it didn't take a huge number of Tea Party members to change the policy priorities of the entire Republican Party. Obviously, the Tea Party was full of policies that were just genuinely harmful to people, whereas certainly from my perspective, what these DSA and DSA aligned candidates are bringing to Washington are policies that are, working class centered policies. And, as much as I'll keep heaping praise on people when they deserve it, but it's also, the beautiful thing is it's not personality centric, it's policy centric.
Yeah. And the other thing that will probably happen is if the House and the Senate flip is that a lot of the folks in the Trump administration working in his cabinet and in the White House, they're going to be afraid of prosecution and
they're going to be spending a lot of time in front of these people.
They're probably going to leave the country. They're probably going to want to, resign and maybe leave the country, because I don't know if I'm sure Trump has promised them protection and pardons, but they might not want to go through endless hearings and accountability. Or they're going to write a book and make a lot of money talking about all the gossip.
And we need accountability so bad.
Mm-hmm. That's going to be the Democrats' number one thing is accountability. And
they won't be able to do anything else while Trump's in the presidency. Yeah.
No, but they can at least have hearings and get this information out there.
We can never have that look forward, not backwards message. We can never have that again. That was another thing that bothered me very early on in the Obama presidency.
They got to do both. They got to do things constructive for people.
But you can't move forward without litigating what's been going on, or else it'll just happen again. That was the problem. By not doing something about the Bush administration, by letting all the bankers off the hook for the 2008 crash, Obama set up a precedent of, we can get away with it. And get away with it they have. And we got to reverse that precedent. I mean, it's just, and I feel like that's something that a lot of these people are eager to do. And that's something even some of the Democrats I like the least. At least that's something they're good at, is the accountability side. Because we're going to be talking, by the way, there's also a primary on Thursday in Tennessee. And Justin Pierce, who is one of the, those incredible state legislators in Tennessee, that was years ago, he made national news by trying to prevent some of the most egregious things Republicans were trying to, force through in the state legislature. A bunch of Democratic House members and House and Senate members made a huge stink about some of that stuff to try and slow it down. And Justin Pierce was this very, very young guy, holding down the fort, and now he's running for Congress. So he's got a primary coming up in Tennessee on Thursday, and I'm excited about that one. And then, of course, next week is Minnesota and Wisconsin.
And then in Ohio, there's a chance to pick up Max Miller's seat. Poindexter is the Democrat running because Max Miller has been accused by his ex-wife of holding a gun to her head and
it's so
threatening.
Gross. The story is so gross. Oh God.
Apparently, he's filed his own ethics investigation. He wants to be investigated, and he's released all of these public records. And apparently, one of the records contained nude pictures of his 2-year-old daughter. And Senator Marino, who's Max Miller's ex-wife's father, who's a senator from Ohio, wants whoever released that jailed. So it's not good, and he doesn't want to resign. He spoke to President Trump, this Representative Max Miller, and he's not going to resign. So hopefully the Democrats can pick up that seat.
Yeah, that Poindexter guy is a economic populist. I think factory worker union guy. So he has
No, I
that
think
same
it's
kind of
close. The polls are
appeal.
close. So it's one to
Well,
add to
now,
the
yeah,
list.
now there's a real pickup opportunity because it wasn't massively Trump district. I mean, it was a Trump district, but it wasn't by some egregious margin. And now and by the way, Republicans, we talk about hypocrisy a lot. It seems to be meaningless to voters. They don't seem to mind, but it's so egregious in this case because, you know, Graham Plattner, when the rape allegation came out, like universally Democrats said, okay, goodbye, get out of here, leave. But Republicans went on Fox News and wouldn't shut up about how, oh, Democrats suborn this. This is like, wow, of course they uplift a character like this. And those very same people that gave those sound bites, oh, Max Miller's a friend. I campaigned for him just last week and blah, blah, blah.
I
mean,
think
it's
Rand Paul
just,
said that. Rand Paul said that about
I
him.
know Jim Jordan, famous
Oh, maybe
for,
Jim Jordan. That's who it was. Yeah, I get
yeah,
those two
Jim
mixed up.
Jordan, who is famous for being involved in his own ethics scandal when he was at the University of Ohio. He was an assistant coach, and he basically ran cover for the coach who was
Wow.
who was sexually abusing his own players.
So there's a lot of races to watch, and we're going to have coverage tomorrow of the outcomes of the primaries, and we're going to have another interview with talk about local media and polling.
Yes, especially polling. And now that we're going to have some results. I mean, it's been a dry spell, Jen. All of July, there was only the Arizona primaries. We had June was like nonstop stuff to talk about primary wise. And then it's all just been, what are the polls? What do the polls say? Now we're going to see what the actual election day polls say tomorrow. And then it's going to come fast and furious over August. A lot of most of the rest of the country is going to wrap its primaries up in August. And
okay,
obviously
so folks,
the upper Midwest.
Go volunteer, go door knocking, talk about your candidates you're supporting and why, and educate people. Because I think the more people that vote in the primary and the general, the better off our country will be.
Yes. Get everyone to the polls. Run, don't walk to the polls.
Vote early, but only once.
Hey, and I bucked the usual trend for me. I voted early just to get a horrible day with the DMV out of my system. And I will have to do it again later this week when I have
well, give us an
different
update.
But anyways, for now, I mean, obviously lots of news going on, and we'll get back to, more general coverage, but it's, with this interview, please enjoy our interview with Missy Bakker Roach, and we'll come back tomorrow with results and much more. So thanks for hanging out. On behalf of Jen Schultz, I'm Sam Martin, and this has been Our Descent. And today we are joined by Missy Bakker Roach, a farmer and organizer in northern Minnesota. She was elected to serve as secretary of the Minnesota Farmers Union and started the St. Louis County chapter of that union in 2020, serving as its president for its first 5 years. When not on the farm, she does work for nonprofits and food cooperatives in the region. Missy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
So, I mean, the situation for family farmers, not just in Minnesota, but around the United States, has gotten a lot worse. I know that bankruptcies are up, and they have been for a while, but even more so since Trump has come back into office. And there's lots of big global things happening that are really affecting farmers. What are you noticing most about kind of how the big topics of the day are affecting, family farmers and just people trying to make it happen out at the lowest level?
Yeah, I think mostly I could speak on my own observations. I'm a specialty crop farmer. I grow vegetables and I work in local food systems. But I think all around in farm country, there's what we like to call a quiet farm crisis brewing. We've kind of seen a lot of whiplash with tariffs and uh, and healthcare issues. We've got fertilizer, we've got the Strait of Hormuz. Like all of these things are really coming together. The Farm Bill, I think they're doing the markup on that this week. And so that'll be kind of interesting to see what happens with it. It's a huge piece of legislation that basically covers almost everything we do in life and how we operate. And so there's a lot that can get put in there and taken out of it, but it affects folks, whether they're rural or living in the cities. And yeah, so I think there's so much within agriculture, whether you're talking about dairy farms or row crops or specialty farmers or fiber, fuel. You know, you could go down any one of those avenues and quickly discover the disaster impending or how the moment isn't being met for farmers. Like I said, I'm a specialty crop grower. I sell direct market to farmers markets, food co-ops, and it's a difficult situation when you have to kind of reinvent a food system that supports the actual farmer instead of the corporations, the corporate farming operations. And when we were dealing with antitrust and consolidation in the marketplace or right to repair issues, you kind of just hit roadblocks all over the place. So it's kind of like, take your pick. What do you want to talk about? Soybeans, corn. I'm not really well versed on all of that, but there's a disaster in any one of those avenues.
Right. Well, you mentioned the corporate farmers and kind of the rise of this has been going on for 40, 50 years, this kind of rise of the corporate farm pushing out the smaller farmers and those kind of things. And which also has a massive implication on how those farm bills get written. Is the farm bill being written to help family farmers, or is it helping corporate farmers? And we've had our answer for a long time. I mean, as we've seen family farmers get whacked over and over and over again. What are family farm, small farmer, regular people who want to do farming? Let me put it that way. What do they want out of a bill like this? I mean, what has the farm bill been in the past, and what do people want to see, regardless of, use specialty crops or is it very specific to each different kind of farmer, or are there some overarching things that you want to see policy changes? Because obviously the policy that's passed is a decision we make as a public. And if that decision is to preference corporate farmers over family farmers, that's a decision that's being made. So what decisions can change? What can change in those bills?
Yeah. I think going back to kind of the first statement is, what do family farmers want? We want to farm. And we want to grow food or provide food for the community that we live in and go from there. I mean, we can feed the world. Our Minnesota is ranked, I don't know, I've seen anywhere between 4, 5, 6th in the nation as far as our agriculture economics go. And so we know we can do it. But when we're talking about just feeding our community, we don't necessarily have those markets to be able to do that because of consolidation, pushing, the store shelves are basically real estate for a lot of these corporations that are owned by just one or two, three major brands. And so it's difficult to actually get into that system of a local resilient food system. I think about the meat processing industry. We've got, basically 4 companies that own 85% of the marketplace there, and a small farmer. I'm not a hog farmer, so to speak, but I've raised hogs for consumers, direct market. And with no USDA plants available, We can't get to the restaurants or the schools or to the store shelves, but we're trying to change that slowly with the Farmers Union. We've developed a food processing site in Staples, which we are hoping that we can facilitate kind of that an ease on that, and farmers can enter into that market to be able to sell their meat products. So there are ways that we can kind of eke our way into it, and that's what farmers want. We don't want to have to, a generational farmer doesn't want to lose the farm. You never want to be like the last person in your family to lose the farm. So we want to make sure that we're keeping farmers on the land if they want to be. We want to get new beginning farmers. It's so important. The average age of the farmer right now is 58 years old. And I know a lot of farmers who are still farming and they're like 80 and they should be like, enjoying retirement and all of that. And I'm sure that they do, but it's really important for, I think, our national security that we get more younger farmers farming. And that means land access. That means having these markets for people to actually like make a living and thrive being a farmer. It doesn't mean that you have to just be that you're trying to make ends meet all the time. It's just kind of a difficult career, I guess, to get into unless you were not generationally brought into it. I didn't have a hand-me-down tractor or anything like that from my grandparents' farm. And I don't actually own the land that my grandparents are on. We're still like stewards of that land, but it's not a working farm anymore. But a lot of folks don't have those opportunities because we become more and more removed from the farm. And so we need to make sure that we're allowing people who want to farm and want to get into farming. Maybe they don't know anything about farming, or maybe they've spent generations, but we have to make that accessible and able for those folks to be able to do that.
So, Missy, you said a couple important things. One is that there are a lot of barriers from people to get into farming, even if they have, you know, farming in their family and they have the ability to take over some farmland from their parents or grandparents, because land is very expensive. So that's one big barrier. And machinery is also very expensive. So the capital required to get into farming is expensive. And I know that Minnesota has explored some opportunities and some legislation to try to subsidize land purchases, make it easier for younger people to get into farming for the Young Farming Program. But I know today is the first day of Farm Fest in Minnesota. I believe it's in Morgan, Minnesota. And I know they were doing educational workshops. And one of the workshops they were offering is how to take over a family farm. Like what are the financial requirements that you need? And a lot of folks want to continue their family farm. But if they have a lot of siblings, that land is so expensive that they don't have the wealth to pay off their siblings. And so some families are forced to sell the land when their parents or grandparents pass away instead of farm it. So that could, go, they might sell it to a corporate farm. So we see fewer and fewer family farms. And I don't mean family farms, those that lease it to corporate farms. I mean, they're actually doing the labor and the work in farming. So I know that because of the tariffs, and I know that the Attorney General of Minnesota just joined other states to litigate against the most recent tariffs that the Trump administration and President Trump just imposed in other countries. Those hurt farmers and our ability to sell and export our crops to other countries and input things that farmers need. The other thing you mentioned, Missy, was the right to repair. So I know that the Attorney General in Minnesota, Keith Ellison, just won a lawsuit, I think working with the FTC, against John Deere. And the requirement is to have John Deere make their software available so farmers can repair their own equipment. And I know a lot of Minnesota farmers and other farmers in other states would like to make right to repair a state law and potentially a federal law.
Yeah. just going right back on that, the right to repair is really important to me. I had the opportunity to fly out and have a meeting with the FTC chair, Lena Khan. This was a couple years ago about my own tractor story. I have a John Deere tractor. I bought it brand new, and it's basically like the workhorse of the farm. And when your tractor breaks, that's an inconvenience. When your tractor breaks and they can't fix it and they let it sit on the lot for the entire growing season, that's devastating. And for the for the company to not back up their own skilled mechanics and give them the tools that they need to figure out how to fix my tractor, um, which basically it got fixed because, somebody at John Deere had a buddy who had a garage and was like, "Hey, did you try this thing?" And it was like, I could have done that if I could have just taken my tractor to the mechanic, just over in the backwoods, it probably could have gotten fixed a lot faster. But I'm I probably have the smallest tractor available that you can buy, but it's like I said, it's a mighty tool for me. And when I can't get potatoes in the ground and or anything in the ground because I can't even use my tractor, that's a real hit to my pocketbook. Also the food I eat, and it's really frustrating. And so one thing like that, and it's expensive, not just like on the I'm not making money, but I also have to pay for those repairs. And so when that adds up to thousands and you're not making that money, you can see how it's easy to get in a hole and wonder if like what you're doing on the farm is worth it. How can you afford to, losing money? How can you afford to do that? You can't, especially with something that's so important and vital to your operation. So I was really happy to tell my tractor story to the AG as well, Keith Ellison. He's been a champion for farmers, and it's been really important to me as a small farmer to have that kind of support against like a huge world corporation. But like I said, John Deere's got like there's software, there's the mechanical parts of it, and the stories that I've heard, you could go down a conspiracy hole with all of that tractor repair stories and how if the system was hacked and people were just unable to use their tractors, we could be looking at a national crisis in our food system, which is why it's
That's a
important that we have a resilient food system.
that's a
But then,
really good point about
transitional farming,
cybersecurity.
yeah, totally, totally. And then you also mentioned transitional farming and, family dynamics. Every family's different. And like you said, sometimes those dynamics make it impossible for a farm to continue in the family name. So, yeah.
So I don't think the right to repair is in the federal farm bill this time. I know people are advocating for it. And the other thing that some farmers are upset about is California Prop 12, which is the state law that says if you want to sell pork in the state, you have to have a certain size area for raising hogs. And I think that they tried to pause or repeal California's law in the US House Farm Bill, and I don't think it's in the Senate Farm Bill. Um, and I think I think, smaller pork producers I think many of them are fine with California's Prop 12. It might be the corporate hog producers that are upset with that um, legislation passed in California.
Yeah, I've just kind of become aware of Prop 12 in the last few months, learning about that. Certainly, you mentioned smaller farms. It's a different setup than a corporate farm with farrowing operations and where it's enclosed. Um, And as a small producer, I have my thoughts about larger corporations with confined animal feedlot units, I'm not a fan of that. I try to opt out of that whenever I can, certainly by raising my own animals. But I think that when we're trying to talk about a food system that is resilient, a major corporate farm like that, we saw that during the pandemic. That's not a resilient food system. And when you have animals that are in cages, that, we've got pathogens and, all kinds of things that can happen, but it's just dominated by a corporate system. And I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, I guess, as far as the Prop 12 goes, but because I don't want to throw anybody out, under the bus who is trying to do things right. But, you have to kind of work with the parameters that you're given. And I am I've been to some California farms and they're amazing. And, without California for our food supply, if we would kind of be in trouble if we didn't figure out a way to, if California just was gone, and we would have quite a time figuring out how to redistribute food across the globe. So I think it's always better if we can treat our animals better. And sometimes that doesn't work well with an industry that puts profits over people, or for the sake of the animal, you're just always looking at profits. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing all the time.
Well, these meat producers are, many of them, like the corporate head, they're not American companies either. And so they may not be as concerned with what's going on with American workers and American farmers and those kind of things either.
Yeah, I
Prop
mean, we've
12.
got other countries that are buying up farmland. We've got, consolidation that's just kind of globally. And if we were able to, kind of separate all that out and, go back a few years before, the major corporations took over everything, we might be able to untie some of this mess. But profits dominate. And so I guess, it's up to folks to kind of become aware and then opt out and then try to understand, where is the food coming from and how is this affecting my community? And, we've got Riverview Dairy Farm that's hoping to go in. I think they have a herd that's maybe 9,000 and they want to go up to 20 or 30,000 head. I mean, who's that good for? That's not good for the cows. It's not good for consumers. It's not good for the environment. And it's not good for our local dairy, our smaller dairies. We're already losing dairy farms at an incredible pace. I think just in this last year, we've lost 1,300 farms. We're a state of 64,000 farms, 65,000 farms. But we're just going to continue to shed smaller farms, then we're going to really just kind of eat away at our at a secure food system.
That depends on just these mega corporations that have this global scope, as you say. God, that's chilling.
Well, the Iowa Farm Bureau, along with Iowa State University and the Iowa Bankers Association, they just released a report like 2 weeks ago. And they found just in Iowa, big ag economy, that there's a big downturn with net farm income falling 53% from 2022 to 2024. And they're attributing this loss in income, farmers' income, to very high input costs like fertilizer because of what's happening with what Trump is doing in Iran and his war in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. They also noticed a depressed grain market. I'm assuming that's because we're not able to export grain to certain countries. And there's a lot of uncertainty with trade. So that puts a lot of stress and pressure on farmers and real businesses that depend on those farmers to be successful and making a profit, and the communities that those farmers support. So Iowa, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with their election, because a lot of the farmers in Iowa are really struggling economically. And they're also seeing their potential prices for their crops decreasing. And with input costs increasing, that doesn't bode well for their future income. So this could have political implications. I mean, Iowa did vote for President Obama, so it's trending red after that. But maybe it'll become purple or blue in some areas in Iowa because of the struggles of their family farmers.
Yeah, I was just watching the live stream of Farm Fest and the candidate forum today. I think it was the 8th district, maybe the 6th, 7th and 6th, maybe the 5th was in there too. And I think the incumbent party there, Michelle Fischbach, Stauber, Emmer was not in attendance there, but to me, it was really evident that at least my representative, Stauber, doesn't get it. He's very kind of, like the president is going to get it to everything's going to be our way of life. We're going to protect it. And it's kind of these platitudes of like nothingness. And that's really bothersome for me, because if he doesn't get it, he doesn't understand that his district, the 8th district, I mean, it's not necessarily an agriculture district. But when you're focused on things like, things that are not in your district, and you're not talking about the things that are really happening in your district, like the 8th district is kind of bucking a trend when it comes to farming, where we actually have affordable land prices, where people can get into farming. We're noticing an increase of small farmers from Cambridge to Canada. And that's a good thing. That's a really great thing. But when we're not standing up in Congress to be able to provide some of the infrastructure needs that these farmers, can enter into the market to make it, and to not recognize that these small farmers and building a resilient food supply is part of national security, that's a problem. I mean, I'm all for sustainable aviation fuel or maritime fuel. I'm all for that. But when you kind of break it down to like the food that you're actually eating, and not just food stuffs or like, making products that go into making Doritos, and then we want to make America healthy again. We have to kind of walk the walk. You've got to invest in those programs. You've got to invest in SNAP dollars at farmers markets. You've got to make sure that people can get into those markets where they can sell good beef, good pork, lamb, eggs. We had an egg crisis like a year ago, and my customers didn't have issues because my hens were happily laying, and I wasn't feeling that egg supply crunch, but a lot of other people were. I work at the co-op and at a food co-op, and we get whenever we can't get a certain vegetable in, I want to know why. And so when I go to the produce manager and have a talk about why we're not getting red peppers, and it's like, oh, well, maybe because ice has been raiding farm fields, and we can't get those peppers today. Or, there's storms out, and this, climate change is another thing we haven't even talked about yet. So we're kind of at a precarious space when we're depending so much on like one way of getting our food, and then not talking about like how we're getting our food, and actually who we're depending on to pick our food, but also like, kicking them out of the country, and then we don't have, anybody to pick food. And so it's a mess. It's a mess. And when we talk about generational farming, immigration is part of that story. Certainly we had immigrants that came and were a part of the first like wave of farmers and kind of, put those down. And then we have, immigration is synonymous with agriculture, past, present, and future.
Yep.
There's probably not anything in this food supply that immigrants are not a part of, like they're a part of it all, whether it's the producing, picking, planting, processing, delivery, stocking the store shelves, from the beginning to the end. It's so, agriculture and immigration ties in there too. And I think sometimes we forget that, I think that we forget sometimes that we have a past of immigration that was tied to agriculture, and it became one of the reasons why our country is where we're at today, and in the sense that we're great. We're a great country, but sometimes we forget our past and we don't acknowledge the reasons why we're great.
Yeah, that's a good point, Missy, about how reliant our farmers are, the US is, on visas for workers from immigrants to feed the country and for farmers to get sufficient labor to harvest their crops. And I know even Republicans have been complaining about that because they're hearing from their constituents who are farmers and they can't find workers to work on their farm. So it is a big deal. You did also mention that you were streaming candidate debates at Farm Fest in Minnesota, and I think those might be recorded. So if people search up Farm Fest Minnesota, you can see the video recording of the debates of various candidates running in Minnesota. And I know that Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins was at Farm Fest today, making comments, speaking in front of a crowd. And I have a couple quotes I just want to read. She said, quote, "Input prices are killing farmers' bottom lines, specifically the rising cost of equipment, labor, and land. There's no doubt those prices have gone up as they were trending pretty significantly down before conflict in Iran. Not here to talk about Iran, unfortunately. I don't know much about that. I just know about agriculture." So here she is admitting that farmers are hurting, and it's because of the conflict in Iran. So I don't know if that will get back to President Trump, but I'm sure he's not going to be too happy about her statement. But at least she's being honest, and I don't know. I'm sure she's at a lot of other things, but that's the quote that's being picked up in the media right now. So hopefully she also heard from farmers
Yeah,
and she got a lot of input.
yeah, I think she did. I did watch that. I did watch that, and I caught that quote, and I was like, "Huh, that's an interesting statement to make." Like, "Oh, but I'm not here to talk about that." And um, one thing that I find very different between this Secretary of Agriculture and the previous Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. Um, Tom Vilsack was very much he was kind of a professor. I had the opportunity to, I guess, kind of be in one of his class seminars or whatever, like 3 times. But he always um, and he's served as the Secretary of Agriculture before, but this last go round, he was really focused on leveling the playing field for small farmers. He recognized the critical importance of maintaining, why farmers matter, why keeping small farmers on the land matter to the survival of rural communities. Um, and rural communities are vitally important, I guess, like it or not, because they are a huge part of our military. And I fall in that category. My daughter right now is in the Navy, and so kind of watching the news and the conflict that's going on, it's almost sometimes too much to be keeping track of, with worry, not only just for the farmers but for our service men and women serving the country. Um, But Tom Vilsack was really, and he kind of put in with the American Rescue Plan, and we had the Inflation Reduction Act that really came out. And a lot of the initiatives that we're seeing now, that groundwork was laid during the Biden administration. You know, we're seeing these groups. I just had a meeting today with the Area Economic Agency about how do we have a climate smart food system in our area. And so that kind of, you know, requires us to take a look at, well, how can we get there? You know, and then like we've talked about before, you have to get farmers on the land, and you have to maintain them, you know, make it worth the while to stay there and invest in it. So maybe it is a generational farm someday. But a lot of the things that I'm positive that I'm seeing now have kind of been, and you know how long sometimes legislation will take. You know, you craft these, you know, somebody's got an idea about things, and you want to, you know, craft these bills and make it law and all of these things. And so it all just doesn't happen quickly. And so I think a lot of times we expect things to happen quickly, or we see things that are happening that we like, and you have to say, hey, that groundwork was laid with the previous administration. And that's important because, you know, when we're talking about climate smart food systems, we're talking about resiliency, and we're talking about the ability for us to be more secure in our national food system, you know, because we definitely don't want to be importing more food than we are exporting, because we need to feed ourselves. And if we can't do that, then we're screwed.
Well, Missy, we've danced around politics a lot. I'd like to dive like kind of full in, because you talked about the importance of farmers to rural communities. You talked about the importance of these initiatives that were begun by Tom Vilsack during the Biden administration. And just if we look historically, if we look at that, people talk about, kind of a rural urban divide politically, which has been brewing basically since the 1980s. It's the divide. If you look at voting patterns and you look at that history, it just has just gotten wider and wider since the 1980s. Now, there's a very excellent book, which I recommend to anyone who will listen to me. It's pretty recent. It's just called Rural versus Urban. It's an academic book, but it has lots of charts and graphs and stuff. And these people are really trying to tackle this question about why is there this political divide that is shaping the entire country, and they focus on that, why that divide has happened and what's been going on in rural America, which is politically their voting patterns. They're voting for people who are empowering corporate farmers and are passing laws that are really hurting rural America economically. And why is that? It makes no sense. Now, they come up with reasons for why that is in the book, which is basically going back to the conservative Democratic presidencies of Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, doing things that people saw as a betrayal of the New Deal. Now, of course, the Republicans had been against the New Deal ever since the New Deal became a thing, but it hits a little different when it feels like a betrayal rather than the party that was just always against it. So people got that sense, oh, neither side is helping. And, that's, it's a whole book, but that's in a nutshell kind of how this divide really started taking off, is when people kind of forgot that New Deal farmers are just as important as anything going on in the city. FDR made a huge emphasis of making sure that rural America was understood to be just as important as urban America, and that there was this symbiosis and everybody relied on everybody else. And that was kind of how the New Deal became so popular and solidified the politics of not just urban America, but rural America as well. And it's been that breakdown ever since. But what you're talking about, the things that actually help farmers, are being specifically done by one political party over the other. namely Democrats. But people associate rural America fairly, I might add, they associate it correctly as being incredibly deeply red, deeply Republican red. So what are these driving forces as you see it politically that's going on in our rural places?
Yeah. As you were talking there, I kind of had a flashback to Brooke Rollins this morning, and I think she said something about eliminating wokeness with the USDA. And so I feel like there's some social issues, that there's these wedge issues that are a driving factor in that. But you're right, like you need each other. You need the urban and the rural need each other. It's very symbiotic. But I think generationally, back in the 40s, when people were coming off the farm and we had kind of this, people were moving off the farm, and then the next generation became more disassociated with the farm. And so I don't know if maybe that's just something people just forget that we were a really strong rural country at one point. And I think we still are. Um, but why are rural folks voting for an administration that is trying to, take away Medicare or Medicaid, why? That's a good question. And
Well,
I could say like, yeah. No, go ahead.
no, well, I was just going to, I mean, what can, if you were to design, not that you're not a political consultant, but you are someone who politicians need to speak to, and you know are representative of the type of person who needs to be messaged to by politicians. I mean, again, that argument in the book, which is just right over my shoulder here, rural versus urban, I think it's a fantastic book. But the point of it is that the what messages, I mean, the Democrats lost the rural vote. They really did, massively. What messages do Democrats need to make to win that vote back? I mean, what needs to change politically in order to win that back? Because I think you're right. I think these social issues and wokeness and that kind of stuff is appealing more, but presumably there's a message, an economic message, a message that can go straight to the heart of what people need in rural America. And what do you think that message is? If you were to build one, like what do people in rural America want that Democrats could speak to if they focused on
Um, I guess the first word that comes to mind is opportunity. Um,
it? Okay.
I think rural folks want opportunity. I don't know if there's a perceived factor of of othering. Other folks are getting things that I should be getting or that I'm deserving of, and they're not deserving. Um, Feeling forgot about or isolated. I think that, messaging is tricky because when we talk about like what are people watching and what is their income level? Like how much cable can you afford? What are the free channels and what are the free channels offering folks? What's the message coming from Fox News? What's AM radio spouting off? And when you don't necessarily have the greatest internet or, broadband or whatever, and you're going to get your news in little blips, you're going to get it from where you can afford it or it's free. And I'm not saying this is the answer for that, but I think it's part of the messaging problem is that I think sometimes the consolidation of news corporations, news channels, all of these, it's easy to package up a free message and deliver it to somebody who can't afford, to get another message or to subscribe to a paper, an independent paper. Those are becoming few and far between now. but it's still a cost. And so I think the economics of messaging is an issue. Certainly, Jen, you're more of the economics into the economics than I am. So, but that's just kind of something I think about.
Yeah, I think you're right, Missy. I think that lack of information and then getting it from sources that definitely have a lean towards conservative mega talking points has not helped Democrats. But I think some farmers got upset at Democrats in certain states. They felt they were being overregulated. And I know a lot of Democrats care about climate and they were, wanting them to do cover crops or irrigation ditches. And I think a lot of farmers thought it would be more expensive for them to do that. It may not increase their income. And they were concerned. And maybe that's what drove some farmers who had historically been voting Democrat to vote Republican and looking for something different or change or less regulation. And I think you're right. When I was campaigning across the rural district, the 8th district, for Congress, I heard a lot of people who wanted access to health care. They didn't want their local hospital closed or limit services. They had to drive really far to a dentist. They wanted good schools. There's some of their schools were closing or consolidating. They're very worried about opportunities. They wanted to have their children stay in their small town or come back to the small town. So they wanted to have jobs available for their children and grandchildren. And they just were not seeing those opportunities. So I think what Democrats need to do is make sure that they're investing in healthcare and education in rural communities, in broadband, so people have access to the internet so they can read more independent, free journalism and sources. Um, and I think that we need to remind people that Democrats are fighting for I think, what people want and what their core values are. They just have a hard time breaking through this message because we've lost local papers and everyone seems to be watching the Fox channel. So I think it's really hard for Democrats to get their message out there, as you said, Missy.
But what should that message be? I mean, because I think some Democrats are doing a good job and some are very specifically not. And so that can get muddied. But
Well,
so
I
I
think
guess
for
that goes
today,
back to
Sam, I think for today, they have to remind people of what Trump's actions, how that is hurting their community, their real community and the
Jen,
farmers.
that was the strategy and that lost, to remind people about Donald Trump. I mean, what is the positive message? I mean, I guess, Missy, I want to go back because you talked about how to get the message out there, but what should the message be? I mean, opportunity, you mentioned, feeling neglected, which for sure,
I think
no
opportunity,
question.
but also talk about the missed opportunities. Like, the current administration is really missing opportunities to invest in ways. And instead, we're, worried about the reflecting pool and, like coming up with false allegations about who done it, who did, pointing all the fingers everywhere. And it's so I think like the economic message doesn't, the lead is buried, so to speak, like they're not going to address, like Brooke Rollins, she had to say what she had to say, but then she's like, well, I'm not here to talk about that. But like, that is the issue. So I think that the Republicans are good at messaging because they avoid talking about the important issues like gas prices. Like, we were really upset about gas prices and then they were coming down and then they were going back up. And, sometimes it's like, if the election were held today, who would you vote for? And it would be like, well, what's the gas price? Some people just are not, they have no idea why the gas price rises or falls. They don't think about it, but they're going to get a 2-second headline about, or maybe a quote from the president talking about how he's going to take care of it or whatever. And then, then that person is on their way to figuring out how to just put food on the table. So I think economic message is really important. But also the opportunities, and things that matter. You talk about rural hospitals. I mean, the hospital in my little town, they're really worried about having to close. And that's I mean, we're pretty rural. I mean, I live 20 miles outside of a town of 500, and the next town is 40, 50 miles away, and that's, Hibbing or Virginia, either way, but those are small cities. But um, if I wanted to get to a major place where like Duluth, or, Duluth is 2 hours away still. Um, And I think people are just working. I mean, they're working and they don't have time to tune in. And so when they can get like the president saying something like, he's going to take care of it or whatever he's going to do, some people find comfort in that. I don't. And I'd like to just say that even though rural folks, it looks red, um, it's just a lot of land. Land doesn't vote. It's the people. And so a town of, 500 folks, we're not all Republicans or red. And it can be tricky to almost feel isolated when you go by like colors. Like rural is all red. You could say that, yeah, but I think that helps build a message of division in a way, because you're still dividing between, Republican, Democrat, red, blue, instead of saying like, um, we're a purple state, which I think is really cool because, uh, somebody just said the other day that they really like a divided government because it doesn't get too extreme one way or the other. And I think we don't talk about that as much. We are always, certainly I have my views and I vote how I'm going to vote, and other people do accordingly. But um, I think when you talk about like something like one party being more woke than the other, or the social issue aspect of it, I think that sometimes gets, I think that message gets that over, it clouds over the real issue of that we need each other. My community, within the community, we need the hospital. And in order for like the Forest Service to operate, it needs, grocery store, hospitals. And so all of these communities really depend on these other businesses, or just, things that people need, basic infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I think so when opportunity is a message, to say like, we have opportunities to build. My town just had a flood a couple years ago, and we kind of looked at the town and there was opportunity to say, hey, we don't have enough housing here. We don't have enough businesses here. And to develop, a commission to say, let's look at what we need to do to make sure that we're attracting businesses and attracting families. And in order to do those things, you have to have government help. And I think some people think like help from the government is a bad thing, but we're driving the roads, and that's that's the government helping us get from point A to point B. And so sometimes I think that there's just kind of a, a, a miscommunication maybe, or and then
Right.
how we get our news and how we communicate is another thing. But
Right. Well,
yeah.
I think to piggyback on what you just said, I mean, people, say, oh, if we need government help, that means something is wrong, because they don't want the government to pick winners and losers. But everything the government does is picking winners and losers, and the winners right now are the corporate farms. But you mentioned earlier,
Right.
that feeling of isolation and that feeling of maybe not having that community, and that's one of the ways, if we're going to turn this around, is for communities to build themselves. People find each other and people build these communities in these rural places, which you're very much a part of. I mean, you work with nonprofits, you work with a co-op, you started a county branch of a farmers union. Why don't you talk about that? Why don't you talk about those groups and kind of the ways we maybe start to change things by building up these groups in these rural places?
Sure. I kind of had a foot in both worlds growing up. I was raised with my grandparents on their farm, and then my mom, we lived in the cities. So I grew up in South Minneapolis. Summers on the farm, and went to school in Minneapolis. And I always kind of knew that I wanted to be a farmer. I grew up watching Little House on the Prairie, and I was like, I want to have chores and sell eggs and all of that good stuff. And so kind of having like the opportunity to do it wasn't there when I was in high school. Nobody was at Roosevelt High School being like, do you want to be a farmer? Like there was none of that. So I think, that would have been helpful a long time ago. But I lived in Alaska for a while, and that's where I found a farmer's market. Like was my first taste of a farmer's market. It's like, oh my gosh, this is in Alaska. Um, and that was so when we moved back to Minnesota, and then building a farm and then realizing like, okay, I want to be a farmer, but how am I going to sell vegetables? So I had to like start a farmer's market. And then knowing that, the first year it was just me and this other gal, just the two of us. And then pretty soon there was other people who were just like it, like young entrepreneurs who just wanted to bake bread or sell vegetables or do whatever. And so the farmers market really developed an opportunity for folks in rural areas to kind of have this. And I don't want to call it a side hustle because it's not, it's the livelihood. It is part of how you live and make a living.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of entering into the conversation of knowing where your food comes from, I felt like joining an organization that could help elevate that voice, or I could figure out like, why can't I get my pig processed and sell it at the farmer's market? Well, it's not USDA, and there's not many meat processors around that you can do that. And while trying to figure that out, and so kind of entering the stream, and then I found the Farmers Union, and there was other things that I was really concerned about, like neonicotinoids for the pollinators, like that. I really, had a passion of like taking care of the flowers and protecting spaces where pollinators could thrive, because pollinators are, we are hugely dependent on pollinators for our food system. And so we have to protect them. Well, that kind of led into, with the understanding of like, why is our part of the state, why don't we have a seat at the table? Like we've been known for small farmers, but we're just not row crop farmers like in the southern or western or central part of the state. We've got a different kind of agriculture component going on. We've had mining, of course, but timber. And that's one of the big things that I think agriculture looks at in this area is timber, because we have timber sales. We got the USDA Forest Service offices here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess realizing that local food really wasn't on the menu. So when you don't, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So it kind of meant like, let's start our own chapter for St. Louis County, because we've got farmers up here and we want to talk about our food system. We want to talk about pollinators. And in doing so, it kind of helped us understand that, the more people that you have organizing with, the better you can deliver your message, and the more, people power. And so
Absolutely.
starting that was really, I think, an important way of just saying, hey, we have farmers up here, and we might not look like the farmers over there or the farmers over there, but we're up here doing it. And maybe my farm is a Christmas tree farm. I'm not growing soybeans or, corn or anything like that. Maybe my farm is a rutabaga farm, potatoes. So it was a kind of a different way for folks to realize that, yes, we live in an area where we grow things a little differently, and agriculture isn't just soybeans or pork or anything like, it can be trees. We can include our timber industry in agriculture. We've got climate assisted forest migration where we're taking trees and helping to produce the next generation of forests that's going to be adaptable to climate change. And so kind of elevating those issues meant making sure that our part of the state had a seat at the table. And that, I think, was an important part of how the conversation just, gets going and how we can not be left out up here in the Arrowhead region.
Right. And it's connecting people within the region who otherwise wouldn't have connected, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's, people are like, oh yeah, I've been farming for years and like, come on, join the union. And then pretty soon they're down at the state convention and we're debating policy and they get it. Like, you get it. Like, wow, this is really how it matters. Like, you can't just write farm policy without farmers. So you have to and I don't want to say like it's pretty easy to make yourself heard in these circles because it's definitely not, especially when you're a small farmer.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels very much succinct to where we're at and meeting the moment of like, where's our food coming from? And then, well, COVID, I think, was a big eye opener for a lot of folks in going to the grocery store and trying to get what they needed and realizing how delicate of a food system we had. And the small farmers were all here like, hey, who needs food? Well, there's the distribution troubles of the larger farms of being able to get food on the shelves through, across the country, driving all that. But local farmers, we were like, hey, who needs it? I mean, we slaughtered thousands. I don't even know the number. It's so big of hogs during COVID because of the consolidation of meat processing, packing. These 4 companies own like 85% of the market share. And, but I had pigs and it was like, okay, we still got it. We can still deliver that food. So no worries there.
And from those connections and that work you're doing, I mean, you're building a group of a force to be reckoned with in northern Minnesota. And is that something you see that can be replicated elsewhere? Or is that something you are seeing being replicated elsewhere?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think since I've kind of put my head into the agriculture policy, farm policy in the past decade, I've seen a lot of young farmers come into the fold and they have energy and they have a voice and I am here for it. So it's really great to have new farmers come in and talk about our food system and corporate farming and to just say no, we're not having any of that. And they've got, developing co-ops, food co-ops for, just even small food co-ops in their communities for farmers to come together. And so there's kind of a new way of doing business, I think, is happening right now. And we're laying the groundwork for folks to be able to do that.
Missy, if young people want to get involved with farming, is there a farm fest for small farmers, or are there opportunities? Do they go to the farmers union website, or is there something that's upcoming at the state fair? How can they get information if young folks want to get into farming?
Yeah, I think if you're just gonna scour for information, go to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture website and just, look, beginning farmers, and just, or if you are looking at land, if you're talking with your family, maybe there's a farm transition conversation to be had. But just start talking to people. And if you really want to, maybe you don't even know how to be a farmer, but you feel like you were called to be one, just there is a ton of information out there. You just gotta like find it. I want to say I went to like 10 years of farming conferences and just reading all of the books and all of the websites on everything from soil health to when to plant carrots, and when to harvest garlic and, all of these things that matter. Because if you're going to be a farmer, you want to be a successful farmer. And so kind of the nuts and bolts of it, that you have to really educate yourself on how you're going to farm. What are you going to farm? Are you going to have lambs? Are you going to have cows? Are you going to grow hops and have a brewery? So figure out what you want to do and why you want to do it. What is your passion? Why do you want to farm? I think that's one of the most successful things you can figure out is your why. Why are you there? And then it becomes kind of your passion, and you know how it is with passions. You just want to like follow through and go down the rabbit hole of, how do I make a state fair champion carrot grow or something like that, but I think you just start out where you're at, look at how, what you have, start where you're at, look at what you have, talk with the people around you and anybody that you can find that's supportive. But the Department of Agriculture certainly has a lot of like technical information. And then after that, it's like throw yourself into farming conferences and you'll find like-minded folks there. And you'll probably find a neighbor or two who are like, oh, yeah, you only live 10 miles from me. So let's build,
And does the University of Minnesota Extension, and I'm sure other states have something similar as extension services?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the extension services are great. And you see a lot of the same people that run in the different organizations, but they kind of overlap. So the extension services, yes, definitely. There's even like, I think now I want to say there's like you can major in local food systems now, I think, where that was not necessarily a thing a decade ago. So it's nice to see like that. Somebody a decade ago, people had the vision to say we need to change up how we're feeding our nation, how we're feeding our communities, and so they put money into the education. Like we need to educate folks, and so yes, the U of M definitely has some classes and some resources that a person could find on their website as well.
Well, we may have started on kind of the bad news surrounding agriculture and how things have been very difficult. And, that's not going to change overnight, but it's the stuff that we were just talking about here that I think it's very hopeful. And it's something that, because not only is the supply side, which is to say farmers like you, connecting and getting more knowledgeable about their own, abilities and power in the marketplace. But I think the consumer side, the demand side, is also starting to learn. There's more and more people demanding farmers markets and food co-ops and things like that. So I think, where there is some good news, we'll go for it. But Missy, thank you so much for your time. It's been an awesome conversation. Hopefully we can have it again sometime soon. Very much appreciate having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Missy. I hope
Thank
people,
you.
I hope
It's
our
been
audience learned a lot.
fun.
All right.
Thanks. It's been fun. I appreciate the work that you're doing here, and I appreciate the questions, and it was a great conversation.